And for now, going to the more hard-hitting conversations we're going to be having, we're bringing together two very different perspectives on some of the biggest design for planet topics. Our first conversation, we are exploring for how climate is a social justice issue, experienced through our housing stock. Poor quality housing, which is bad for the environment, is also bad for people's health. Whereas conversely, housing that is well insulated, as we saw yesterday when we went and visited the Goldsmith Street social housing project, it is surrounded by green spaces, is better for people's health, and doesn't need to be that expensive either.
So we're delighted that we're joined today by Kwajo Tweneboa, a 24-year-old activist, though I hear your birthday is coming up soon, from South London, who uses social media to give a voice to social housing tenants and expose the derelict living conditions that many are forced to endure. After publicly shaming his housing association into carrying out repairs on his family's flat, after a year of inaction, Kwajo has travelled the country, putting pressure on politicians and social housing providers to improve living standards. David Mikhail is the founding director of Mikhail Rich's architecture practice and director in charge of the Sterling Award-winning, this is the first Sterling Award-winning winner of the festival, Goldsmith Street for Norwich Council, which provides beautiful, low-carbon and inclusive social housing. David's work is all about delivering beautiful places that make a difference, helping to encourage social connectedness with buildings that are genuinely sustainable. We're privileged to have them both share their thoughts with us today. And for those of you online, please do enter your questions in the Q&A, and I'll be asking them for you on your behalf. Over to you, Kwajo and David.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. We'll start by introducing ourselves, a bit of our sort of backstory, and then get into conversation, but also try and leave 10-15 minutes for questions. So please do have a think and feel free to ask questions towards the end. We'll try and get through as many as possible. But as mentioned, my name's Kwajo Tweneboa, and for the last 3 years, I've been campaigning on behalf of social housing tenants and housing tenants up and down the country that have unfortunately been forced to live in many circumstances in sort of disrepair and conditions that have been described in some cases as unfit for even animals to be living in. I myself lived in poor social housing, grew up in poor social housing. I've been in temporary accommodation that was converted car garage even, and moved into social housing and had issues like cockroaches, mice, damp mold, ceilings that caved in and collapsed, poor security of the house. My dad became ill with cancer in these conditions. He was receiving medical treatment by district nurses 3 times a day, and unfortunately in January 2020 passed away from his cancer. And things sort of went from bad to worse, and I eventually shared the conditions we were living in online. It went viral. ITV News came down, as well as other news organisations, and picked it up, and then since then been travelling the country, going into people's homes, shaming landlords, taking pictures and videos of the conditions people are living in, and really trying to put up a fight on behalf of better housing for all and everyone, but also treating housing as the priority it should be, and building not just more housing, but quality housing for people to live in. I've tried putting emphasis on that, and that's why it's so great to be here today. The relationship between design and our homes is one that is so important, and if we're going to fix this crisis, it has to be done correctly.
Thanks, Kwajo. Hi everyone, I'm David Mikhail, Director of Architectural Practice, Mikhail Rich's. And I think we've been invited here today because of, I guess, our focus on how architecture can be a force for good socially, but also environmentally. So our particular journey as a practice has been through the lens of sustainability for 20 years. And for us, it's kind of reached a kind of a culmination, really, with the scheme down the road in Norwich, of which we're incredibly proud, which is 100% socially rented. It's all what they call passive house, which I should explain effectively means really well-engineered buildings, which are super comfortable for residents. And we've recently had the privilege of getting a post-occupancy feedback from a lot of residents in Goldsmith Street. And amongst some of the kind of headlines are a kind of third of respondents have found an improvement in their health since they moved in. So I guess what we're talking about today is the huge disparity between the lived experience of so many people in the socially rented and indeed the private sector in this country, and the potential experience which residents are living at Goldsmith Street at the moment, just down the road, which is comfortable homes provided by a local authority, Labour local authority in this case, very comfortable homes which are incredibly cheap to run because heating bills are so low. And those of you that were there yesterday would hopefully have also seen that through careful, considered design, not only can we provide really great, warm, comfortable homes, but we can provide neighbourhoods where children play, parents meet each other, old people meet people in the streets, where people feel safe. And I firmly believe that good design is how we get there. Of course, we're not going to get there without the political levers being pulled by people like Kwajo, so I'm absolutely thrilled to be in conversation with you today. I think we have the same interests at heart, but we're coming at it from a completely different perspective. And we were talking just now, weren't we, about, 10 years ago, I don't think anybody would have been able to do what you've done, which is to be a spokesperson for so many people on your own without any affiliation to a wider body. And that's one of the great things about social media, that you've launched this platform. So maybe you could just talk a bit about how you see your role in the future as well. And what do you think, Kwajo, what do you think would be a great outcome for the next 2 or 3 years?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I mean, I like to think I'm somewhat of an agitator when it comes to housing and trying to push that agenda, and especially with the run-up to the next election, I want it to be a priority. And whenever housing has been made a priority, it's always been made a priority for the wrong things. I mean, for decades, we haven't focused on social housing, the quality of social housing. And because of that, we find ourselves in the current state. First and foremost, we haven't got enough social housing. Secondly, we're selling off the little stock that we do. Thirdly, the stock that we do have is often of poor quality. And on top of that, we haven't taken into consideration issues like climate change. We've got a lot of old stock too. And I mean, in relation to your comment about health and the relationship between health and housing, last year, the NHS spent £1.4 billion looking after people that had become unwell as a direct result of the conditions that we're having to live in. So it does have an absolute direct link to people's health. But I think in long term, I want to make sure housing is a priority at the next election. Social housing is a priority, but also looking at the quality of the homes that we're building and thinking long term, building practically too.
So that reminds me that I was lucky enough to be involved tangentially with a UCL report that came out last week by Murray Walker. Not Murray Walker, sorry. Different Walker. Murray Fraser, who's a professor at the UCL. And they've just released a report which talks about the importance of cost-benefit analysis when you're looking at housing as a nation. As you've just alluded to, Kwajo, there are so many externalities and costs associated with poor housing. And I think when we're looking at the levers of power and the levers of finance that we need to think about to get this country's housing stock back on its feet, we need to be thinking about the cost-benefit analysis. So health, well-being, cost of the NHS, education. There's just so many. So that's just one point I'd like to make, that people are talking and thinking about that. Academics are talking about it. You don't hear much about it in the political frame at the moment, but hopefully that's where you come in.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. We have to be looking at these issues definitely through different lenses and almost connecting these issues, because housing and the quality of housing has a direct impact on so many different other areas of society, whether that be education, like I mentioned, health, poverty, rates of crime, and it has so many, it's so interlinked, but we've been looking at housing as a sort of separate entity, and until we start looking at it as having impacts on other areas, I don't think it would ever get the priority that it deserves to be treated with.
As a designer, I can tell you that when we're looking at housing, we are just so conscious of all the potential benefits of well-designed housing. Like, whether it be the benefits to parents of knowing that their children can play safely, just beyond the back of their garden, whether it be the potential benefits of knowing that your street has a relatively slow traffic regime so that you're more likely to get to know your neighbour. Because there's great research that tells us that traffic speed in a street has a direct correlation to how readily you are going to be feeling part of a community. There are just so many potential benefits which, when you're looking at providing housing, are not just about the kind of the space of the home. There's so many peripheral benefits that we have as designers and clients have control over.
I was going to ask you actually, make the point and then ask you that one of my, and I know we've spoken about this earlier on too, but climate change and the environment, I think, as well as being worried about disrepair and the quality, it interlinks with the quality of our homes, but disrepair and people's health being impacted. One of my growing concerns as a campaigner, having done this for 3 years now, is climate change and the impact it's having on people's homes and their lives. Last year, we saw we saw the highest temperatures we've ever had on record in this country, and there was a period of time during the summer where normally I have people complaining about the conditions, cockroaches, mice, damp, mold, but there were people in tower blocks reaching out to me because they were absolutely boiling in their homes, and they had young kids and didn't know what to do, and we had to myself and some other people had to get together to buy like some air con units and fans. And I know there's this huge push within design and government that we need to insulate homes, and we absolutely do, because people's homes are absolutely freezing during winter. But where is the focus in terms of climate change during the summer and homes becoming overheated? We can push for insulating, but then climate change works both ways. It's not just one way.
So we've got overheating in the summer to contend with.
Yeah.
We've got potential flooding. So really comfortable homes are perfectly within our power. Whether we're talking refurbishing or brand new, we have the building physics knowledge to be able to make them comfortable in the summer without resorting to aircon. So, for instance, the Goldsmith Street project, we know how many days per year it's going to be too warm, and there's a certain threshold over which you can't go, and so we know how to do it. Insulation is a great thing, but you also need to make sure that, for example, you don't have too many east-west facing windows, which are harder to keep the sun out of than actually a south-facing window, because a south-facing window you can put a little lid on, and the sun's so high that actually it's quite controllable. Around the east and the west, it's really low, and it's still hot. So, all the kind of building with computer-generated models now, we know how hot buildings get through design. So it's totally doable to avoid the worst aspects of climate change with a kind of a technological approach to building.
And do you think there's enough emphasis on building homes with the people that are going to live in it and their lifestyles in mind? Because there's been situations, especially with social housing tower blocks and sort of stigma with social housing tenants, where there's a lot of damp and mold, for example. I will go into a tower block and I'll go into people's homes, and see their homes filled and riddled with damp and mold, and a lot of it is it is very structural. A lot of the buildings are very, very old.
Yeah.
But there's situations within social housing where these blocks of flats have been designed and residents have been told not to dry their clothes indoors. And they've got a balcony, but they've also been told not to dry your clothes on your balcony because it's an absolute eyesore for everyone else in the community. But then they haven't built or provided any sort of facility, whether that be an airing cupboard, a drying cupboard, for people to actually dry their clothes. And I mean, that's lifestyle. That's everyone's lifestyle. But I think that's a prime example of where homes haven't in the past been designed with people's lifestyles in mind.
Interestingly, a lot of the estates used to have drying areas.
Yes,
didn't
yes,
they?
yeah.
You know, whole
Communal,
areas
yeah.
of drying which
Yeah.
get, you know, not used or abused. But I think the thing about the kind of passive house homes we are designing around the country for local authorities is that they're not only they super low energy, but because of the ventilation system we have within the house, they're warm, they're well ventilated. And one of the bits of feedback we had from one of the residents was that they can dry their clothes in the house, in the flat, really quickly. And so, you know, they're not being victim blamed as they were by their previous landlords where they were living before. Because they were made to feel incredibly uncomfortable about the fact that their place was mouldy. They were told it was because they were drying their clothes in that. You know, so we need to upgrade our building stock so they're all well insulated and they're all well ventilated. And that's all part of reducing the carbon coming from the housing stock, but it's also about making sure people have comfortable, healthy homes. So it's a kind of double whammy.
Something I've definitely noticed is, and I mean, it was inevitable, it was going to happen, but the deterioration of social housing and social housing estates. Often when you speak to people about social housing, they relate it to the idea of deprivation, or you can often, especially in London, go and point out social housing estates because it is run down compared to, I mean, Pimlico, for example. On one side, you've got £1 million mansions. On the other side, you've got an estate that's falling to bits. However, I think it's really important that when we are creating homes, you almost, and I know in Vienna it's almost similar, you can't tell the difference between a social housing sort of estate or homes and other forms of housing because it's all integrated, it's treated with the same sort of quality and investment. And I think it's important for that to happen, and not just to remove stigma, but also to make sure everyone's proud of the homes that they're living in, and it, in a way, takes away that level of inequality, but helps create cohesiveness too. I don't know, as well, through your experience, if you agree that that's something that's important.
Yeah. I think one of the things you've alluded to is the kind of stigma associated with lots of post-war housing.
Yeah.
I can't really go into the history of why that happened, but I think people are beginning to challenge that. So we've been lucky enough to be working on Park Hill in Sheffield with Sheffield City Council and Urban Splash. And there, you know, a massive 1,000 home brutalist structure was about to be knocked down, and then Historic England got involved and listed it. And what's happened there is we've, and other architects as well, it's a massive project, have breathed new life into this building that was so stigmatized that even when I was there the first site visit, one local lad just came up to me and said, just knock it down. You know, and now it's incredibly successful. Its carbon profile is so much lower. The homes are so comfortable, and the stigma associated with that post-war brutalist era has gone. And so, you know, imagine if we could roll that out across the country with all those housing estates. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. You know, to just look at them anew, re-engineer them. Make sure that we're not knocking them down, but we're just reframing them and no longer stigmatizing them. It's completely possible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And obviously we've heard that housing will be or should be a priority at the next general election. There's been commitment to build more homes. I think Labour said something like 1.5 million.
Yeah.
which is great. We need more housing. Do you worry though?
You actually said 1.5 million over 5 years. Don't tell me what that. Don't ask me what that is every year.
Yes, yeah. My maths is bad, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Obviously nowhere near enough where we are with current demand, I think. But it would help make inroads. Do you worry that it could become an issue though, in the sense that we've set these sort of building targets?
Yeah.
And the important thing is to knock these homes up. I've been into new builds that after 3-4 years are falling.
I'm really worried.
To bits.
I'm really worried
that they're going to sacrifice.
I'm really worried
quality.
I'm really worried about that, and I'll tell you why. Because that happened historically. That happened in the 60s. You know, we put up loads of homes. Some of them just weren't up to scratch, and you know, I think the race for numbers dominated, and you know, we've got a climate crisis. We've got the history of having seen that. We need to make sure that as well as 300,000 homes a year, they're done to the highest possible standard. And there's no reason why they shouldn't be. It just needs care.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, there's developments in London even that I've been into. It's not just one estate. I've been into quite a few where they're less than 10 years old. In one case recently, it was, I think residents moved in 2018. And I went there a few months ago, and like the balconies were rotting away. I mean, there was damp and mold riddling the communal areas. There was corroded pipes. And within social housing, I know this because I've done this work for a long time, we have situations where the cheapest spec or cheapest quality is often the one that's chosen in order to do things cost effectively.
Yeah, but there's no view to longevity.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I've said for a very long time, if we don't build homes that are of good quality and long lasting, with that being the aim, efficient, taking climate change into consideration, then if we think we have a housing crisis at the moment in terms of disrepair, homes falling apart, etc., we're going to have a situation in 20 years' time from now where we've got all these fairly new builds that we've put up and we've knocked up falling to bits, and it's only going to exacerbate the crisis that we find ourselves in now. At least with the old stock that we had, right, some of those estates lasted 70 plus years, but if we've got these new builds that are lasting 5, less than 10 years before falling to bits, it's going to cost the government, taxpayers, a lot more long term, and we're only going to find ourselves on the back foot again.
And with climate change, we're going to find that if we're not very careful, we're going to have to retrofit even the stuff that's being built now. Because it's going to be consuming too much energy. So it's really, from my perspective, it's really important that the government, whatever colour they are, really grapple with low carbon housing now, because we have I mean, Goldsmith Street was designed 5-6 years ago. You know, we can do it.
With 5 minutes to go, can we get some questions from the audience and from the phones, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Please do,
So I have one in for Kwajo. Some real admiration for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Do young people have enough say in housing and sustainable housing design? If not, what can we do to change that? And for you, David, will there be any periodic follow-up with the residents of passive homes, and are residents provided with the knowledge to care for them?
It's very interesting. I don't think young people have a say in a lot of things, to be fair. And I think they need more of a say, especially when it comes to, well, a lot of things, but in particular housing, because if we're being honest, it's us and the next generation that are going to have to pay the consequences, I think, if things go wrong within housing, and they should absolutely have a say on how homes should be built, what the priority should be, what it is that they need, what they think is needed for their lifestyle and for the lifestyle of future generations. And often, or I've experienced this in my campaigning work, but as a young person, speaking on these really important subjects, you're, in some cases, like, not pushed to the side, but it's almost like, although they don't say it directly, you can tell it's, well, they're young, what do they know, sort of thing. And again, that's down to stigma and whatnot, but I think we need to allow sort of safe spaces for everyone, including young people, to voice their opinion, to be taken seriously, to be listened to, but also take their requests and really try to analyse what it is they're asking for. Enough of that I don't think is happening. And I think if we were doing more of that, we'd perhaps find a lot more solutions to some of the issues that we are faced with, because we have people from different ages, different backgrounds and experiences all coming together to voice their opinion in order for one thing, and that's to find a solution. So yeah, I think it's really important and needs to happen more.
Thanks. I completely agree. More diverse voices in the design process is always going to make it more robust. And the question you gave me about Passive House, well, Mikhail Riches conducted our own post-occupancy survey with the residents over this summer, and it was really interesting what we got back. Are we going to carry on doing it? Yeah, we'd love to do it regularly. It's something that people don't generally do at the end of a project because they run out of money. I mean, inevitably the landscaping suffers first, and then the post-occupancy analysis never happens. There's been a big drive within the industry to try and encourage more of it for obvious reasons, because how can you learn without getting the feedback from residents? So we've done it ourselves for Goldsmith Street.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David and Kwajo. That was really super inspiring to also see how both of you could interrelate and bring both of your work and practices and see how you could collaborate. I know we're going to use this word too often, but seeing that, how the opportunities for that is quite inspiring. I was just reflecting on the fact that we spoke about power this morning with what Rosie was talking right in the beginning about how power plays a big part. And we can see that playing out also with social housing, some of the things you're campaigning about. We can also see about the feedback loop that you mentioned, David, and you went and did the survey yourself and looked at the interconnectedness between health benefits and something like the way you've built the social housing together, having those children playing out there. I think what's really interesting for us is sometimes as designers, we are not very good at making things visible, is the invisible benefits of how these things kind of add up in a value chain. And I'm hoping that going forward, we're going to see much more this interconnectedness of these issues, whether it's tackling climate change for health, tackling climate change with new kind of business models around social housing, financing. We can also see whether the collaboration, key to collaboration is not just how you can show whether your idea or issue can affect other outcomes, but also bring about other partners into your own projects who would like to invest, fund, or provide their resources. So I think...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.